3 creepy true backyard surveillance horror stories. What you're about to hear will make you think twice about what happens in your own backyard when you're not watching. These aren't urban legends or campfire tales. These are 3 true stories from real people who installed security cameras in their backyards, expecting to catch the occasional raccoon or package thief. Instead, they captured something far more disturbing. From unexplained figures lurking in the shadows to discoveries that shattered entire families, these surveillance recordings revealed secrets that should have stayed buried. The footage exists. The police reports are real. And after tonight, you might want to check your own backyard cameras. I'm your host at Dark Whispers, and before we begin, if you enjoy these true horror stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode. Trust me, you'll want to be here for what's coming next. Now, turn down your lights, turn up your volume, and let's watch what was never meant to be seen. Story 1. The Watcher in the Woods. Sarah Mitchell never considered herself paranoid. As a single mother of 2 in suburban Portland, Oregon, she'd always felt safe in her quiet neighborhood of cookie-cutter homes and manicured lawns. That sense of security evaporated in the summer of 2019 when her 8-year-old daughter Emma started having nightmares about the tall man who watches from the trees. At first, Sarah dismissed it as an overactive imagination. Kids have nightmares. But when Emma insisted the man was real, that she'd seen him multiple times while playing in the backyard, Sarah decided to take action. She spent $300 on a wireless security camera system, installing 4 cameras around her property, with 2 focused on the spacious backyard where the kids played. For the first week, the cameras showed nothing unusual. Squirrels raiding the bird feeder. The neighbor's cat prowling through at dusk. Emma's soccer ball rolling across the grass in the wind. Sarah began to relax, convinced that her daughter's imagination had gotten the better of her. Then came the morning of July 15th. Sarah was reviewing the previous night's footage over her morning coffee, a habit she'd developed since installing the system. She was fast-forwarding through hours of darkness when something made her stop. There, at 2:47 a.m., a figure appeared at the edge of the frame. Her blood ran cold. A tall, impossibly thin man stood at the tree line where her property met the undeveloped woods behind her home. He wasn't moving toward the house. He wasn't doing anything threatening. He was just standing there, perfectly still, facing her daughter's bedroom window on the 2nd floor. Sarah's hands trembled as she rewound the footage. The man appeared at 2:47 a.m. and remained motionless until 4:32 a.m., when he simply turned and walked back into the woods. 1 hour and 45 minutes of absolute stillness. She immediately checked the previous night's recordings. He was there. Every single night since she'd installed the cameras. Always arriving between 2:30 and 3 a.m. Always standing in the same spot. Always facing Emma's window. And he'd likely been doing it long before the cameras went up. Sarah called the police that morning. 2 officers arrived within the hour and reviewed the footage. Their faces grew grave as they watched. They confirmed what Sarah already knew in her gut. This wasn't random. This was targeted surveillance of her child. "Mrs. Mitchell," the older officer said carefully, "we need to ask you some difficult questions. Has your daughter mentioned anyone showing unusual interest in her? Any adults who've tried to talk to her, give her gifts, anything like that?" Sarah racked her brain but came up empty. Emma was a normal kid with normal interactions. School, soccer practice, playing with neighborhood friends. Nothing out of the ordinary. The police increased patrols in her neighborhood and advised Sarah to keep the cameras running. They wanted to catch this person doing something more concrete than just standing at a property line. The next night, Sarah barely slept. She watched the camera feeds from her phone, waiting. At 2:51 a.m., he appeared again. But this time, something was different. He was closer. Not by much, maybe 10 feet, but definitely closer than before. And he was holding something. Sarah zoomed in on her phone screen, her heart hammering. It looked like a notebook or a sketch pad. She called 911 immediately. The dispatcher kept her on the line while officers rushed to her location. Sarah watched on her phone as 2 patrol cars pulled up outside, their lights off to avoid alerting the intruder. She watched as the officers split up, 2 coming to her front door, 2 moving quietly around the back of her house toward the woods. That's when the man on camera turned his head. Even through the grainy night vision footage, Sarah could see him looking directly at the approaching officers. And then he smiled. A wide, deliberate smile directly at the camera before he turned and vanished into the woods. The officers searched the area for over an hour with flashlights and a K-9 unit. They found his spot, the ground trampled from multiple visits. They found cigarette butts, dozens of them, creating a small pile where he'd apparently stood night after night. But they didn't find him. What they did find made Sarah's blood turn to ice. Pressed into the soft dirt at the base of the tree where he'd stood was a sketch pad, left behind in his hasty retreat. The officers brought it to Sarah in an evidence bag. Through the clear plastic she could see the first page. Was a drawing. A detailed, skillfully rendered drawing of her daughter Emma, sleeping in her bed. The perspective was from outside the window looking in. Sarah's legs nearly gave out. The officer quickly flipped through the rest of the pages while Sarah leaned against the door frame for support. Every page was Emma. Emma playing in the yard. Emma getting off the school bus. Emma at soccer practice. Emma through the kitchen window eating dinner. The detail was extraordinary and sickening. Some of the drawings had dates going back over 6 months. "We need to take your daughter somewhere safe tonight," the officer said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "And we're going to catch this son of a bitch." Sarah's parents lived 40 miles away. She packed bags for her and the kids in a blur of panic and tears, trying to stay calm for Emma and her younger son Tyler, who didn't fully understand what was happening. They left within the hour, the kids confused and Sarah traumatized. But Sarah kept the cameras running. The police wanted them active, wanted to catch this predator if he returned. He did return. The next night at 2:49 a.m. This time, when he found his usual spot empty of cigarette butts and his sketch pad gone, he stood there for only 7 minutes. Then he walked closer to the house. Much closer. He crossed Sarah's property line, walked through her backyard and approached Emma's window. He stood there, looking up at the dark window, his face clearly visible on camera for the first time. The police ran the footage through facial recognition software. They got a hit within hours. Marcus Allen Petrie, 43 years old, a registered sex offender who'd been released from prison 18 months earlier after serving 7 years for attempted kidnapping of a minor. He was supposed to be living in a supervised halfway house in downtown Portland. He was supposed to be attending mandatory counseling. He was supposed to be monitored. Instead, he'd been stalking an 8-year-old girl from the woods behind her home for at least 6 months. Police arrested Petrie the next morning at the halfway house where he was supposed to have been all along. In his room, they found more sketch pads, more drawings, and a detailed journal describing his obsession with Emma. They found maps of Sarah's neighborhood with patrol routes marked, schedules of when Sarah came and went, notes about the family's routine. Most chilling of all, they found a timeline. A plan. Petrie had been building up to something, and according to his journal, he'd been planning to act on the next new moon, when the darkest nights would give him the best cover. That was just 4 days away. During the investigation, police discovered that Petrie had been using a gap in the electronic monitoring system. He'd learned to briefly disable his ankle monitor in a way that created only a small blip in the data, easily dismissed as a technical glitch. He'd been doing it several times a week for months, always in the early morning hours when supervisors were least attentive. The halfway house shut down pending investigation into their protocols. The security company that provided the ankle monitors faced multiple lawsuits. And Marcus Petrie went back to prison, this time with additional charges including stalking, criminal trespass, and parole violation. He'll be eligible for parole again in 2037. Sarah and her children never moved back to that house. They stayed with her parents for 2 months while she broke her lease and found a new place across town, somewhere without woods nearby, somewhere with streetlights and close neighbors. Emma underwent counseling for over a year. The cameras are now stored in Sarah's garage. She couldn't bring herself to throw them away despite everything, despite the nightmares they revealed. They saved her daughter after all. They caught a predator before he could act on his darkest impulses. But Sarah told me that sometimes, late at night in their new home, Emma still wakes up screaming about the tall man who watched from the trees. And sometimes, Sarah wonders if there was an even darker truth hidden in those woods, something the cameras never captured. Because when the police searched deeper into the woods behind her old property, following the trail Petrie used night after night, they found something else. A small clearing about half a mile in, carefully maintained, hidden from any hiking trails or roads. In the center was a fire pit surrounded by stumps arranged like seats. And buried in a shallow pit nearby, they found children's shoes. 7 pairs, different sizes, different styles, weathered by time and dirt. None of them matched any missing children's cases in Oregon. Not yet. The FBI is still running DNA from the items, still searching for answers. Marcus Petrie has never admitted to anything beyond watching. He maintains he never touched anyone, never hurt anyone. Just watched and drew pictures. Just satisfied his urges from a distance. But 7 pairs of children's shoes tell a different story. And somewhere, families might still be looking for answers about children who vanished in the Pacific Northwest over the past decade. Sarah Mitchell's cameras captured a monster. But they may have also revealed evidence of something far worse, something that law enforcement is still piecing together. Sometimes I think Sarah wishes she'd never bought those cameras. Never seen what lurked in the darkness beyond her fence. But then she looks at Emma, alive and safe, growing up and leaving those nightmares further behind with each passing year. And she knows that the camera's cold, mechanical eye saw what a mother's instinct suspected but couldn't prove. Sometimes the truth is more horrifying than any nightmare. But sometimes, that truth is the only thing standing between a monster and an innocent child. Story 2. The Midnight Gardener. Robert Chin had lived in his suburban Boston home for 12 years before he finally decided to install a security system. It wasn't crime that motivated him, it was convenience. His doorbell camera had proven so useful for catching deliveries that he figured he might as well cover the whole property, especially his pride and joy, his elaborate backyard garden. Robert was an avid gardener, and his backyard was his sanctuary. Over the years, he'd cultivated a stunning landscape featuring rare orchids, Japanese maples, heirloom roses, and a koi pond he'd built himself. He spent his weekends carefully tending every plant, maintaining the delicate balance of his personal Eden. So when plants started dying in the fall of 2021, Robert was devastated and confused. His roses, which had thrived for years, suddenly wilted. His orchids dropped their blooms prematurely. Even the hardy hostas began to brown at the edges. He tested the soil, adjusted watering schedules, checked for pests. Nothing explained the sudden decline. That's when he decided the cameras might help. Perhaps they'd catch whatever was causing the damage, an animal pest or a soil contamination issue he couldn't see during daylight hours. He installed 6 cameras in early October, covering every angle of his backyard. The first night of recording showed nothing unusual. The second night the same. Just darkness, the occasional rustle of leaves, and the gentle movement of his wind chimes. The third night changed everything. Robert was reviewing footage the next morning before work, coffee in hand, when he saw her. At 11:47 p.m., a woman appeared in his backyard. She came from the side yard, moving confidently through his garden gate like she belonged there. Robert's first thought was that someone was trespassing, probably a neighbor cutting through his yard. But as he watched, his confusion deepened into something else. Something approaching dread. The woman walked directly to his rose garden. She knelt down beside his prized Madame Alfred Carrier roses, the ones that had been mysteriously dying. And then she began to dig. She used a small garden trowel, working methodically in the dirt around the base of the plant. She pulled something from her jacket pocket, something Robert couldn't quite make out in the night vision footage, and placed it in the hole she'd created. Then she carefully covered it, patting the soil back into place with practiced hands. She moved to the next rose. Then the next. She spent 45 minutes in his garden, digging small holes near various plants, placing unknown objects and covering them again. At 12:33 a.m. she stood up, brushed the dirt from her knees and walked back out through the side gate. She never once looked at the house. Never acted furtively or like she was doing anything wrong. She moved with purpose and familiarity, like this was something she'd done many times before. Robert immediately rewound the footage to get a better look at her face. When he saw it, his coffee mug slipped from his hand and shattered on the kitchen floor. He knew her. Margaret Hartley. His next-door neighbor. His widowed, 72-year-old neighbor who brought him cookies at Christmas and always complimented his garden. The sweet old woman who'd lived next door for over a decade, who'd known his late wife Linda, who'd attended her funeral 3 years ago. Robert's mind reeled. Why would Margaret be sneaking into his yard at midnight? What was she burying in his garden? He pulled up the previous night's footage, going back to when he'd first installed the cameras. The sick realization hit him like a punch to the gut. She'd been there every night. Every single night since the cameras went live, and presumably for weeks or months before that. Always between 11:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. Always tending to his garden with those strange, secretive plantings. Robert's hands shook as he fast-forwarded through the footage. He watched Margaret bury objects near his orchids, around his Japanese maples, along the edges of his koi pond. Whatever she was doing, she was being systematic about it, covering his entire garden over multiple visits. He should have called the police immediately. That would have been the rational thing to do. But Robert had known Margaret for years. She'd been kind to him during the darkest period of his life after Linda's death. Some part of him couldn't reconcile this bizarre nighttime activity with the gentle woman who waved to him from her porch every morning. Instead, he decided to confront her directly. That evening, Robert waited until he saw lights on in Margaret's house. He walked next door and knocked. When she answered, her face lit up with her usual warm smile. "Robert, what a nice surprise. Come in, come in." "Margaret, we need to talk," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Her smile faltered slightly. "Of course, dear. Is everything all right?" "I installed security cameras," he said, watching her face carefully. "In my backyard." The change was instantaneous. Margaret's warm, grandmotherly expression drained away, replaced by something Robert couldn't quite read. Fear? Guilt? Or something else? "I see," she said quietly. "You've seen me then. What are you doing in my yard, Margaret? What are you burying in my garden?" For a long moment, Margaret just stood there in her doorway, seeming to age another 10 years before his eyes. Then she stepped back. "You'd better come in," she said. Robert followed her into her living room, his heart pounding. Margaret gestured for him to sit, but she remained standing, wringing her hands. "I never meant to harm anything," she began, her voice trembling. "You have to understand that. I was only trying to help." "Help with what?" "Margaret, what's going on?" She walked to a bookshelf and pulled out a worn journal, its pages yellowed with age. She handed it to Robert with shaking hands. "This was my mother's," she said. "She was from a small village in Romania. She believed in old ways, old traditions. Ways to help gardens grow, to protect homes, to help spirits find peace." Robert opened the journal, but the pages were filled with writing in a language he didn't understand, interspersed with crude drawings of plants, symbols, and diagrams. "What does this have to do with my garden?" he asked. Margaret sat down heavily in her armchair, suddenly looking every bit her 72 years. "Your wife Linda," she said softly. "She loved your garden so much. I remember how the two of you would spend hours out there together. It was your special place." Robert's throat tightened at the memory. "Yes, it was. After she passed, I saw how the garden became your only comfort. But I also saw how you were struggling. The plants weren't doing as well without her presence, without her energy. I thought I could help. By sneaking into my yard at midnight? By burying things in my soil?" Margaret's eyes welled with tears. "The traditions my mother taught me, they're about balance. About helping spirits transition, about maintaining the connection between the living and the departed. I thought if I performed the rituals in your garden, Linda's spirit could still be there with you, helping the plants grow like she used to." Robert stared at her, torn between anger and disbelief. "You thought you were conjuring my wife's ghost in my backyard?" "Not conjuring," Margaret said quickly. "Inviting. Maintaining the connection. The items I buried, they're meant to anchor a benevolent presence, to invite peaceful energy. Small tokens, herbs, a lock of hair." "A lock of hair?" Robert interrupted. "Whose hair?" Margaret's face crumpled. Linda's. I took a small piece at the funeral home when I said my goodbyes. I thought I could use it to help her spirit find its way back to the place she loved most. The room spun. Robert felt sick. His elderly neighbor had taken hair from his dead wife's body and had been burying it in his yard along with God knew what else, all in the name of some folk magic ritual. He struggled for words. That's insane, Margaret. That's desecration. I know how it sounds, she said, tears now flowing freely. But Robert, it was working. Your garden was thriving after she passed. Better than it had any right to. You told me yourself how the roses had never been more beautiful, how the orchids bloomed longer than they should. That was Linda's spirit, her love for that garden manifesting through my mother's rituals. Robert thought back to the year after Linda's death. Margaret was right. The garden had been extraordinarily beautiful that year, despite his grief and distraction. He'd attributed it to Linda having prepared the soil well, to good weather, to luck. But now, then why are my plants dying now? He demanded. Margaret's face grew even more troubled. That's the part one don't understand. The ritual should continue to work, should continue to help. Unless what? Unless Linda's spirit is trying to tell you something. In my mother's traditions, when a benevolent presence begins to cause harm instead of help, it's usually a message. A warning. Robert stood up abruptly. This is crazy. I don't believe in any of this. Then why are your plants dying in the exact spots where I've been placing the tokens? Margaret asked quietly. Why are they thriving everywhere else in your garden, but failing precisely where I've been performing the rituals? Robert had no answer. He wanted to dismiss this all as the delusions of an eccentric old woman. But he couldn't deny the pattern he'd seen in his dying plants. They weren't scattered randomly. They formed a rough circle around the garden, exactly where Margaret had been working. I think you should dig them up, Margaret said. The items I buried. Maybe that's what the spirit wants. Maybe it's time to let go. That night, Robert stood in his dark backyard with a flashlight and a shovel, feeling ridiculous and disturbed in equal measure. But he dug. He dug near the dying roses first. The small hole was about 6 inches deep. His shovel hit something almost immediately. He knelt down and carefully brushed away the soil. It was a small cloth bundle tied with string. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a lock of dark hair, unmistakably Linda's, along with dried herbs he didn't recognize and a small tarnished locket he did recognize. It had been Linda's, buried with her. Margaret had taken more than just hair from the funeral home. Robert felt violated, angry, but also strangely moved. As misguided as it was, Margaret had been trying to keep Linda close, to honor her memory in the way she knew how. He dug up 7 more bundles over the next hour, finding them exactly where Margaret had been placing them on camera. Each contained hair, herbs, and small personal items of Linda's that should have been buried with her or kept in his home. A button from her favorite sweater. A charm from her bracelet. A small photo, water-damaged but still recognizable. As he dug up the last bundle near the koi pond, something happened that Robert still can't explain. The temperature dropped suddenly. He could see his breath in the October air, something that shouldn't have been possible given the mild evening. And then he heard it. A whisper carried on a wind that didn't exist. Let me go. It was Linda's voice. He would swear on anything that it was Linda's voice. Robert dropped the shovel and stumbled backward. The garden was silent again. The temperature returned to normal. But his heart was racing, his breath coming in short gasps. He looked around his garden, at the plants they'd cultivated together, at the pond they'd built side by side, at all the memories embedded in every flower and stone. And he understood. This garden had become a shrine, maintained by Margaret's rituals and Robert's grief. Neither of them had been tending plants. They'd been tending to their inability to let go. Robert gathered all the bundles and buried them together in a single hole, deep in the ground beneath the old oak tree in the corner of the yard, a place where he and Linda used to sit on summer evenings. He said a prayer not because he was particularly religious but because it felt right. I love you, he whispered to the dark garden. I'll always love you. But I release you from this place. You can rest now. The next morning, Robert went next door to speak with Margaret again. She answered the door looking like she hadn't slept. "I found them," he said simply. "All of them. I've buried them properly." Margaret nodded, fresh tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Robert. I never meant to cause harm. I just couldn't bear to see you so alone, couldn't bear to lose Linda completely." "I know," he said, and surprised himself by meaning it. "But it's time we both let her rest." In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. The dying plants began to recover. New growth emerged from what Robert had thought were dead stems. The roses bloomed again, smaller than before but healthy. The garden found a new balance, a new life of its own. Robert kept the security cameras, but he never checked the footage from the backyard again. He didn't want to know if Margaret had returned, didn't want to see if there was anything his cameras might capture in that garden late at night. Margaret moved to an assisted living facility 6 months later. Before she left, she gave Robert her mother's journal. "I hope you never need this," she said. "But it's yours now if you ever want to understand what I was trying to do." Robert accepted it, though he's never opened it since that day. It sits on a shelf in his study, a reminder of how grief can drive people to extraordinary lengths, how love doesn't end with death but sometimes needs to find new forms. His garden is different now. Less manicured, more wild. He's remarried to a kind woman named Patricia who's helping him create new memories in that space. They've planted new flowers, added new features, transformed it from a shrine to a living, growing testament to moving forward. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when he's alone in the yard, Robert swears he catches the faint scent of Linda's favorite perfume carried on the breeze. And sometimes, just sometimes, he finds a rose blooming in a color he doesn't remember planting. He doesn't check the cameras. He doesn't dig in the soil. He simply accepts that some questions are better left unanswered, and some mysteries are meant to remain in the shadows between rational explanation and impossible truth. The security footage exists, stored on a hard drive in Robert's garage. Dozens of hours showing Margaret's midnight visits, her careful rituals, her strange cultivation of something that was neither entirely garden nor entirely graveyard. He's never deleted it, but he's never watched it again either. Because sometimes, the most disturbing thing a camera can reveal isn't a stranger's malice or a criminal's intent. Sometimes, it's the lengths to which people will go in their grief, the boundaries they'll cross in their longing, and the thin line between devotion and obsession. And sometimes, the most frightening question isn't what you'll see on camera, but what you'll see once you start looking for explanations beyond the lens. Story 3: The Family Secret. Jennifer Walsh installed her backyard cameras for a simple reason. Her teenage son Kyle kept sneaking out at night and she wanted proof. At 16, Kyle had recently started dating, and Jennifer suspected he was climbing out his bedroom window after curfew to meet his girlfriend. It was a normal parental concern in suburban Minneapolis, the kind of thing that felt important but not dramatic. Jennifer wasn't trying to catch a criminal or protect her family from some external threat. She just wanted to be a responsible mother keeping tabs on her rebellious teenager. She chose wireless cameras with excellent night vision, positioned to cover both the backyard and the side of the house where Kyle's window was located. She didn't tell Kyle about them. Part of her plan was to catch him in the act, to have undeniable evidence when he inevitably denied sneaking out. The cameras went live on a Friday night in March 2022. Jennifer checked the footage Saturday morning, expecting to see Kyle climbing out his window sometime after midnight. What she saw instead would destroy her family. At 1:47 a.m., a figure did emerge from the house through the back door, not Kyle's window. Someone using a key, opening the door quietly, stepping out onto the patio. But it wasn't Kyle. It was her husband, David. Jennifer felt a spike of confusion rather than concern. David had trouble sleeping sometimes and would occasionally go for late-night walks. She almost fast-forwarded past it, but something made her keep watching. David walked across their backyard toward the detached garage at the far end of their property. He unlocked the side door, the one that was always kept locked because they stored expensive tools and equipment inside. He went in, and the camera watched the closed door for the next 7 minutes. When David emerged, he was carrying something. A large plastic storage container, The kind you'd use for holiday decorations or seasonal clothes. He carried it back to the house and went inside. Jennifer frowned at the screen. Why would David need something from the garage at 2 in the morning? And why had he seemed so furtive about it, looking around the yard before and after, moving quickly like he didn't want to be seen? She checked the previous night's footage. He'd done the same thing. Out to the garage at 1:52 a.m., back with a container 7 minutes later. A cold feeling began to settle in Jennifer's stomach. She and David had been married for 18 years. She thought she knew him completely. But watching him on this footage, she realized she was seeing someone she didn't recognize. The way he moved, the way he kept checking over his shoulder, the intensity of his focus. This wasn't her husband having trouble sleeping. This was her husband hiding something. Jennifer went to the garage that afternoon while David was at work and Kyle was at school. She tried the side door. Locked as always. She used the main garage door opener and went in through the front. The garage looked normal. David's workshop bench was cluttered with his weekend projects. Boxes were stacked along the walls. Garden equipment hung neatly on hooks. Nothing seemed out of place. But Jennifer noticed something she'd somehow never paid attention to before. In the far corner, mostly hidden behind some old furniture they'd been meaning to donate, was a door. A door to a closet or storage space she couldn't remember ever opening in all the years they'd lived here. She moved the furniture aside and tried the handle. Locked. With a padlock she'd definitely never seen before. Jennifer's hands trembled as she searched David's workshop bench, looking for keys. She found a ring of them in a drawer and tried each one. The third key fit. The padlock clicked open. Jennifer pulled the door. It opened to reveal a small storage closet, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet. And it was filled with plastic storage containers. At least 20 of them, stacked neatly from floor to ceiling. The same containers David had been carrying back and forth on camera. Jennifer pulled one down and opened it. Inside were clothes. Women's clothes. Shirts, pants, underwear, all neatly folded. The style was dated from maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Nothing Jennifer owned. Nothing she recognized. She opened another container. More clothes, but also personal items. A hairbrush with blonde hair still tangled in it. A makeup bag full of expired cosmetics. A journal with a name written inside the cover, Nicole Rodriguez. Jennifer didn't know anyone named Nicole Rodriguez. She opened a third container with shaking hands. This one contained photographs. Dozens of them. Pictures of David with a blonde woman, their arms around each other, smiling at the camera. Pictures of them at restaurants, at the beach, at what looked like someone's home. Pictures of them kissing. David was younger in these photos, maybe in his mid-30s, but it was definitely him. And the woman, presumably Nicole, was beautiful and laughing in every shot. Jennifer felt like she couldn't breathe. Was this evidence of an affair? Had David been carrying on a relationship years ago, and these were keepsakes he'd hidden away? But that didn't explain why he was accessing this storage space now in the middle of the night. An affair from years ago would be a terrible betrayal, but this felt like something more immediate, something ongoing. She dug deeper into the containers. Found a phone, an old model from the early 2010s. Found bank statements in Nicole's name from 2009 to 2013. Found a social security card, a driver's license, a passport, all for Nicole Rodriguez. And then, at the bottom of one container, wrapped carefully in a plastic bag, Jennifer found something that made her knees buckle. A ring. A woman's engagement ring with a small diamond. And next to it, a simple gold wedding band. The engagement ring was identical to the one David had given Jennifer when he proposed in 2003. Same style, same cut. She would recognize it anywhere because she'd been so proud of it, had shown it off to everyone. But this wasn't her ring. Hers was on her finger. This was someone else's identical ring. With trembling hands, Jennifer pulled out her phone and searched Nicole Rodriguez missing, along with their city name. The results made her stomach drop. Nicole Rodriguez, age 32, had been reported missing in July 2013. She'd disappeared from her apartment in Minneapolis without a trace. No signs of foul play, no leads, no body ever found. Her case had gone cold within a year. Jennifer looked at the driver's license in her hands. Same Nicole. Same face from the photographs with David. The garage seemed to spin around her. She looked around at the containers full of Nicole's possessions, at the evidence of a life that had been dismantled and hidden away, at proof that her husband had known a missing woman, had possibly been married to her or engaged to her, and had never mentioned her existence. Jennifer's first instinct was to run to the house, to call the police immediately. But something stopped her. If she was wrong, if there was some innocent explanation, she would destroy David's life over a misunderstanding. And if she was right, she was married to someone who knew what happened to Nicole Rodriguez. Someone who had hidden her belongings in their garage for 9 years. Someone who, for some reason, was accessing those belongings in the middle of the night. Jennifer decided she needed more information before she did anything irreversible. She carefully put everything back exactly as she'd found it, locked the closet, replaced the padlock, and moved the furniture back into position. Her heart was racing so fast she thought she might pass out. That night at dinner, she watched David across the table. He seemed completely normal. Asked about her day, helped Kyle with some homework questions, complained about traffic on his commute. He was the same man she'd loved for 18 years, showing no signs of the secret hidden in their garage. Jennifer excused herself early, saying she had a headache. She went to their bedroom and pulled up the security camera app on her phone. She would watch. She would wait. She would see what David was doing. At 1:43 a.m., David got out of bed carefully, trying not to wake her. Jennifer kept her eyes closed and her breathing steady, pretending to sleep. She heard him leave the bedroom, heard his footsteps down the stairs. She grabbed her phone and watched the camera feed. There he was, crossing the backyard to the garage, unlocking the side door, going inside. Jennifer made a split-second decision. She got out of bed, threw on clothes, and crept downstairs. She could see the light on in the garage through the kitchen window. She slipped out the back door and crossed the yard silently. The side door to the garage was slightly ajar. She could hear David inside muttering to himself. Jennifer peered through the crack in the door. David was kneeling in front of the open closet, surrounded by several of the containers. He had photographs spread out on the floor in front of him, and he was crying. Sobbing, actually, in a way Jennifer had never seen him cry in all their years together. "I'm so sorry," he was saying to the photographs. "I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. I should have been there." Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. David reached into one of the containers and pulled out a piece of clothing, a blue sweater. He held it to his face and breathed in deeply, his shoulders shaking. "I can't let them throw your things away," he whispered. "I can't let you disappear completely. You deserved better than this. You deserved so much better." Jennifer stepped back from the door, her mind reeling. This wasn't the behavior of a killer covering his tracks. This was grief. Raw, agonizing grief. She went back to the house and waited in the dark living room. 20 minutes later, David came back in, his eyes red and swollen. He jumped when he saw her sitting there. "Jen, you scared me. What are you doing up?" "I could ask you the same thing," she said quietly. The color drained from David's face. Did you follow me? I saw you on the cameras, David. The backyard cameras I installed. And I went to the garage. I found the closet." David sank onto the couch like his legs couldn't hold him anymore. For a long moment, he just sat there with his head in his hands. Then finally he spoke. "Her name was Nicole," he said. "We were engaged. I was going to marry her in August of 2013. Jennifer felt like she was watching this conversation from outside her body. "What happened?" "She disappeared," David said, his voice breaking. "In July, just 6 weeks before our wedding. She went to work one morning and never came home. Her car was in her apartment parking lot. Her purse was in the apartment. But she was just gone." The police investigated? For months. They questioned everyone in her life, including me. I was a suspect at first, like I always am in these cases. They searched my apartment, my car, my parents' house. But they found nothing because there was nothing to find. I didn't hurt Nicole. I loved her. "Then why didn't you ever tell me about her?" Jennifer asked, trying to keep her voice steady. David looked up at her with haunted eyes. "Because I met you 6 months after she disappeared. 6 months. I was destroyed, Jen. Absolutely destroyed. And then you walked into my life and you were kind and funny and alive, and I felt like I could breathe again for the first time since Nicole vanished. But I deserve to know. I know. David stood up, agitated. I know you did. But how do you tell someone that? Hi, I'm David, and 6 months ago my fiancée vanished without a trace, and I have no idea if she's dead or alive, or if she left me, or if someone took her. I was a mess, Jen. I was broken. And the therapist told me that maybe moving forward, allowing myself to love again, was the only way I'd survive. Jennifer absorbed this, trying to reconcile the man she knew with this secret history. The closet in the garage. Her things. Her family wanted to clear out her apartment, David explained. About a year after she disappeared. They were giving up, I think. Accepting that she wasn't coming back. They were going to throw everything away or donate it. And I couldn't let that happen. It felt like erasing her. So I told them I'd take care of it. I rented a storage unit and put everything there. But it's in our garage now. David nodded miserably. The storage unit was expensive, and after we got married, after Kyle was born, money was tight. I couldn't justify the monthly cost anymore. So I brought everything here. I told you I was cleaning out the storage unit, getting rid of old stuff. You were so pregnant with Kyle, you barely noticed me loading up the truck. And you've been keeping her things in our garage for 16 years. I couldn't let go, David whispered. She had no grave, no memorial, nothing. Her family moved away, stopped looking for answers. The police closed the case. It was like she never existed. So I kept her things. I kept her memory. And the middle of the night visits? David's face flushed with shame. About 6 months ago, I started having dreams about her. Vivid dreams where she was trying to tell me something. I'd wake up feeling like I needed to see her things, to remember her face, to prove to myself she was real. I know it sounds crazy. It doesn't sound crazy, Jennifer said, surprised by her own words. It sounds like unresolved trauma. I never hurt her, David said urgently. I swear to you, Jen, I love Nicole. I would have spent my life with her if I'd been given the chance. But she was taken from me, and I don't know why or how or by whom. And that not knowing has haunted me for almost 2 decades. Jennifer stood up and walked to where David was sitting. She had every right to be furious, to feel betrayed. But looking at her husband's tear-streaked face, she mostly felt sad. Sad for Nicole, sad for David, sad for the years of secret grief he'd carried alone. We need to call the police, she said. David's head snapped up. What? Not because I think you did anything wrong, Jennifer clarified, but because that closet is full of evidence in a missing persons case. Maybe there's something in there, something you never thought was important, that could help them find out what happened to her. They already investigated. 19 years ago, Jennifer interrupted. Technology has changed. DNA testing, forensic techniques, everything. Maybe there's something there that could finally give Nicole justice. Give you closure. David stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. The next morning, Jennifer called the Minneapolis Police Department and asked to speak to someone about a cold case. She explained that her husband had been the fiancé of Nicole Rodriguez and had possession of her personal belongings. 2 detectives arrived that afternoon. David showed them the garage closet. Jennifer stood beside him, her hand in his as he opened the containers one by one. The detectives were professional and kind. They explained that Nicole's case had always bothered the department because it was so unusual. Young women didn't typically vanish without any sign of struggle or any evidence left behind. They asked if they could take some items for testing. Over the next 3 months, those items were processed through modern forensic techniques. And they found something. On Nicole's hairbrush, mixed with her own hair, were several strands from another person. DNA analysis revealed they belonged to a man named Curtis Webb, who had lived in the same apartment building as Nicole in 2013. Webb had been interviewed during the original investigation but had provided an alibi. Detectives reopened his case. His alibi had been his brother, who had since passed away. Without that alibi, and with the physical evidence placing him in intimate proximity to Nicole, they had enough to bring him in for questioning. Curtis Webb broke after 6 hours of interrogation. He confessed that he'd been obsessed with Nicole, had stalked her for months. When she rejected his advances, he'd broken into her apartment one morning after she left for work, planning to wait for her return. But she'd come back unexpectedly, having forgotten her phone. What happened next was, according to Webb's confession, an accident. They struggled. He pushed her. She fell and hit her head on the corner of her kitchen counter. Panicked, Webb had wrapped her body in garbage bags and driven to a construction site where he worked security. He buried her under the foundation of a building that was being poured the next morning. The building was a shopping center that had been completed in 2014. It would have been impossibly expensive to excavate. But Webb drew a map, showed investigators exactly where he buried Nicole under the parking structure. The family was notified. They couldn't recover her remains, but they finally had answers. Nicole Rodriguez hadn't abandoned her life. She hadn't run away. She'd been murdered by an obsessed neighbor and buried in an unmarked grave. Curtis Webb was charged with second-degree murder and pleaded guilty. He's currently serving 20 years in a Minnesota state prison. For David, the revelation was devastating and liberating in equal measure. Devastating because it confirmed his worst fears. Nicole was dead, had been dead all these years. Liberating because the not knowing, the terrible uncertainty that had poisoned his life for nearly 2 decades, was finally over. Jennifer and David went to marriage counseling. There was a lot to process, a lot of trust to rebuild. Jennifer struggled with the feeling that she'd been a replacement, a consolation prize after the woman David really loved was taken from him. But over time, with help, they worked through it. David explained, and Jennifer came to believe that his love for her was real and separate. He hadn't loved her because she reminded him of Nicole or because he was trying to replace what he'd lost. He'd loved her because she was Jennifer, because she'd given him a reason to believe in happiness again. David eventually donated most of Nicole's belongings to her family, keeping only a few photographs for himself. Jennifer helped him create a small memory box that he kept on a shelf in his study, no longer hidden but acknowledged as part of his history. They told Kyle the truth, explaining why his father had been keeping such a huge secret. Kyle, being 16 and dramatic, initially thought it was the most tragic romantic story ever. But as he matured, he came to understand the complexity of grief and love and moving forward. The security cameras are still installed in the backyard. Jennifer sometimes reviews the footage, not looking for anything in particular, just checking in on their space, their life. Sometimes she thinks about that first night she saw David on camera, walking across the backyard carrying his burden of secret grief. She thinks about how we all carry hidden things, how everyone has rooms in their heart that are locked away, filled with the artifacts of past lives and lost loves. The cameras showed her a truth she wasn't looking for. They revealed a secret that could have destroyed her marriage but ultimately made it stronger. Because now there are no more locked closets, literal or metaphorical. Now there is only honesty, however painful. Nicole Rodriguez finally got justice, 19 years after she disappeared. Curtis Webb will die in prison, having finally confessed to the crime that had haunted dozens of people for 2 decades. And David can finally grieve properly, can finally say goodbye to the woman he loved and lost, with his wife's blessing and understanding. Jennifer learned something profound from those cameras. Sometimes the most disturbing thing they reveal isn't a stranger's malice or a neighbor's obsession. Sometimes it's the hidden grief of someone you love, the weight they've been carrying alone, the past they couldn't speak aloud. The footage still exists, stored digitally on a hard drive. Hours of David making his midnight pilgrimages to the garage, tending to his shrine of memory. Jennifer has never deleted it. It's part of their story now, part of how they found their way to a more honest marriage. But she's also never watched it again. Once was enough to see the man she married kneeling in front of a closet full of ghosts, weeping for a love that ended in violence and mystery. Because some images once seen can never be unseen. Some truths once known change everything. And sometimes the camera doesn't just show you what's happening in your backyard. Sometimes it shows you what's been buried in the foundations of your life, waiting all these years to be discovered, to be acknowledged, to finally be brought into the light. Closing. These 3 stories remind us that surveillance cameras don't just capture criminals and prowlers. Sometimes they reveal truths we never wanted to know, secrets that were better left buried, and realities that force us to question everything we thought we understood about our lives and the people we trust. Sarah Mitchell's cameras saved her daughter from a predator but also revealed the possibility of crimes far worse than stalking. Robert Chen's cameras showed him his neighbor's grief-fueled rituals and forced him to confront whether some boundaries between the living and the dead should remain intact. And Jennifer Walsh's cameras exposed a hidden tragedy that could have destroyed her marriage but ultimately led to justice for a murdered woman. These are true stories. The names have been changed, but the events happened. The camera footage exists. And somewhere, in backyards across America, security cameras are recording right now, capturing movements in the darkness, preserving images of things happening just beyond our windows. What would your camera show if you installed them tonight? What secrets lurk in your backyard, waiting to be discovered? What truth might be revealed by that cold, mechanical eye watching silently in the night? If these stories disturbed you, entertained you, or made you think twice about what might be happening in your own backyard, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Dark Whispers. We bring you true horror stories every week, real events that prove reality is often far more terrifying than fiction. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever caught something disturbing on your security cameras? Do you have your own backyard horror story to share? I read every comment, and your story might be featured in a future episode. And remember, the next time you're lying in bed at night, maybe take a moment to check those camera feeds. Because you never know what might be standing just outside the range of your porch light, just beyond the fence, watching and waiting in the darkness of your own backyard. Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and keep watching the shadows. This is Dark Whispers signing off.